280 miles. That is how far the Saab 340 can see. 280 miles of Russian airspace, Russian jets, Russian bombers, all of it lit up in real time on Ukraine's screens, from a plane that has never fired a single weapon. 280 miles. Think about what that means for a country that has spent 3 years fighting blind. Russia has spent this entire war exploiting a single devastating advantage: the ability to launch weapons from safety. Glide bombs released from jets flying well behind the front lines. Cruise missiles arcing in low and fast. Drones threading through valleys and tree lines, invisible to ground radar until it was far too late. For Ukraine, the sky has never truly been readable. There have always been gaps: geographic, technological, tactical, and Russia has filled every single one of them with iron and fire. In this video, we will look at exactly what the Saab 340 does and why Russia's air campaign cannot survive it, how a single unarmed surveillance plane has already claimed its first Russian fighter jet, what the Link 16 question means for Ukraine's future kill chain, and why the arrival of this aircraft, combined with what Sweden has promised next, changes the entire trajectory of this war. But first, let's look at the problem Ukraine has been trying to solve since day one of the invasion. Picture the battlefield from above, not from a satellite, not from a reconnaissance drone skimming the treetops, but from a truly commanding height, 20,000 feet, with a radar that reaches to the horizon and beyond. Now imagine Ukraine has never had that view, not once, not in 3 years of war. That is the reality that existed before the Saab 340 arrived. Ukraine has had ground radars since the beginning. It has had surface-to-air missile batteries scanning the sky. It has had fighter jet radars, point defense systems, and a remarkable network of civilian spotters feeding reports into military channels. None of it was enough. Not because those systems are bad, but because they are fundamentally limited by geography. The Earth is curved. Hills exist. Forests exist. Buildings exist. Every one of those features creates a shadow on a radar screen, a dead zone where targets can hide. And the single most effective tactic for any aircraft operating in a contested environment is to fly low, hug the terrain, stay below the horizon, and emerge from that shadow at the last possible moment. Russia has used this against Ukraine relentlessly. Glide bombs are the clearest example of what that blind spot has cost Ukraine. These are not improvised weapons. Russia's FAB and KAB series bombs, fitted with what the military calls UMPK guidance kits, are sophisticated munitions. The kits transform free-fall bombs, unguided, inaccurate, unsophisticated, into precision gliding weapons with inertial and satellite navigation systems. A jet, flying 40 or 50 kilometers behind the contact line, releases one of these bombs at altitude. The bomb glides forward on its own aerodynamic path, adjusts its course mid-flight, and arrives at its target with devastating precision. The jet never crosses into danger. It never enters the range of Ukraine's best air defenses. It simply releases, turns, and goes home. Here is what that has cost Ukraine. Russian aircraft have conducted thousands of glide bomb strikes since 2023. The bombs have struck defensive lines, command posts, ammunition depots, bridges, apartment buildings, and power infrastructure. They have destroyed entire fortified positions that took months to build. They have killed soldiers who had every reason to believe they were safe behind hardened cover. The warheads on these weapons range from several hundred pounds to over 1,000 kilograms on the heaviest FAB variants. One hit does not just damage a position, it erases it. Ukraine has tried to fight back. Electronic warfare jammers have been deployed along the front lines to confuse the bomb's guidance systems. And those jammers have worked, sometimes. But Russia adapts. New antenna configurations, improved signal processing, updated satellite links. The technological back and forth has continued without resolution, and throughout it all, the bombs kept falling. The deeper problem was never just the bombs themselves. It was the jets carrying them. Su-34 and Su-35 aircraft operating from Russian airfields, flying into Ukrainian airspace for minutes at a time, releasing their payloads and escaping before Ukraine could react. Ground-based air defenses cannot reach them. Fighter jets scrambled in response, arrived too late. And because Ukraine had no reliable way to detect these aircraft early enough, no eyes above the radar horizon, Russia's pilots flew with near impunity. That is the strategic trap Russia built. Area denial through asymmetric cost. Every bomb dropped costs Ukraine defensive infrastructure, human lives, and military momentum. Every bomb run costs Russia a few $100,000 in munitions and a small amount of jet fuel. The economics overwhelmingly favor the attacker, and the attacker has shown no sign of running out of bombs. That is what 3 years of fighting without airborne early warning looks like. Until now. Sweden announced the transfer of 2 Saab 340 AEW&C aircraft to Ukraine in May of 2024 as part of a military aid package worth the equivalent of $1.25 billion, the largest Stockholm had ever sent. The aircraft were not combat jets. They carried no missiles, no bombs, no offensive payload of any kind. And yet, military analysts understood immediately that these 2 unarmed planes represented one of the most significant capability transfers of the entire war. Here is where it gets serious. The Saab 340 is not what most people imagine when they think of a military aircraft. It is a modified regional turboprop airliner. Comfortable seats for business travelers replaced with racks of electronic equipment. The most distinctive feature is the radar, a long, flat antenna mounted in a housing above the fuselage, positioned like a balance beam. This is the PS-890 AESA radar, built around Saab's Erieye system. It does not rotate. It does not sweep. It transmits and receives in both directions simultaneously, scanning a massive swath of airspace in real time. The numbers are not subtle. This radar detects air and sea targets at ranges up to 280 miles. Flying at 20,000 feet, it can simultaneously track 1,000 airborne targets and 500 surface contacts. Not dozens, not hundreds, 1,000 airborne objects, tracked continuously, with their positions, headings, altitudes, and velocities fed into a data picture that Ukrainian commanders can act on immediately. That is not an upgrade. That is a different category of warfare. And the reason it is so transformative comes down to one specific capability: look-down radar. Look-down radar means exactly what it sounds like. The aircraft looks down at the landscape below it. It does not need a clear line of sight from ground level. Hills, forests, valleys, buildings, none of these are obstacles when you are scanning from above. A Russian Su-35 flying 50 meters above the tree line to avoid detection by Ukrainian ground radars is not invisible to a sensor 20,000 feet overhead. This breaks one of Russia's most reliable tactics at a fundamental level. Russia's pilots have spent this entire war learning where Ukraine's radars are, what their coverage ranges are, which valleys and ridgelines offer concealment, and how to exploit every one of those shadows. That institutional knowledge, accumulated over years, practiced in thousands of sorties, is now worth considerably less, because the thing watching from above does not have shadows. It has no horizon. It sees the entire board. Think about what that means for Russia's glide bomb campaign. The Su-34 jets that deliver those weapons operate from Russian airfields. They fly to a release point, drop their bombs, and return. The entire exposure window is measured in minutes. Against ground radars, that is barely enough time for Ukraine to scramble a response. Against a Saab 340 already airborne and scanning, it is more than enough. The aircraft detects the Russian jets from nearly 300 miles away before they even reach their release points. It tracks them in real time. It feeds their position to Ukrainian fighters and air defense batteries. Those units can now position themselves not to react, but to intercept. The difference between reaction and interception is the difference between watching a bomb fall and stopping the jet before it releases one. But that is only half the story. In June of 2025, the world got its first concrete proof of what the Saab 340 could do in combat. A Russian Sukhoi Su-35, one of Russia's premier air superiority fighters, a 4th generation aircraft worth $85 million, was shot down over northeastern Ukraine. But this was not a chance encounter between opposing jets. It was a deliberate ambush, and the Saab 340 was the architect. Ukraine's Air Force launched a series of fighter jets to strike Russian positions in occupied territory and in the Kursk region. This was a calculated provocation. Russian air defense doctrine demands a response to such incursions. A high-value fighter scrambles to intercept, to deny Ukrainian jets freedom of operation over contested airspace, to reassert control. Russia sent a Su-35. The Russian pilot flew toward what he believed was an opportunity. He had no reason to think the situation was anything other than what it appeared to be: Ukrainian jets operating in a relatively exposed position, available to be engaged. He was wrong. He had been tracked since before he left the ground. The Saab 340, already airborne and operating well to the west, had detected the Su-35 on its radar from hundreds of miles away. It watched the jet take off. It tracked its course, its altitude, its speed. It fed that information continuously in real time to Ukrainian F-16 pilots who were already repositioning. When the Su-35 entered range, there was no ambiguity, no guesswork, no fog of war. A Ukrainian F-16 pilot received the targeting data, acquired the Su-35 using an AIM-120 missile, and fired. The Russian jets spiraled down and crashed 10 miles inside Russian territory. The pilot ejected. $85 million. Gone. Not to a lucky shot, not to a chance engagement, to a carefully constructed kill chain built around one unarmed surveillance aircraft. Stay with us, because this is where it gets even more significant. Russia's air superiority over eastern Ukraine has never been total, but it has always been assumed. Russia's jets are more numerous, more capable in raw performance terms, and more experienced in the kind of high-tempo operations this war demands. What they have not been prepared for is operating under continuous surveillance they cannot detect, cannot jam, and cannot shoot down without a very long-range missile strike against a target that is already deep inside Ukrainian-controlled airspace. Russia's pilots now know that somewhere above them, something is watching. They cannot see it. They cannot locate it precisely enough to target it. But they know it is there. And that knowledge, that persistent, unresolvable uncertainty, changes how they fly. It changes how long they stay in their release zones. It changes what altitudes they choose. It changes whether they press an engagement or abort early. Every one of those changes degrades the effectiveness of their strike operations. Russia cannot afford to lose many more Su-35s. The platform takes years to produce. The pilots take even longer to train. And every time one goes down, the Kremlin must confront an increasingly uncomfortable reality. Its most valuable aerial assets are no longer safe in airspace it has dominated since the opening weeks of the war. That is the power of look-down radar. Not just the aircraft it kills, the aircraft it keeps grounded. Now, let's talk about the limitation that military analysts keep returning to. Because the Saab 340 is powerful, but it is not unlimited. Ukraine received 2 of these aircraft. 2. For a country that spans over 233,000 square miles, 2 airframes cannot be everywhere at once. Ukraine's military commanders understand this precisely. These are irreplaceable assets. They are not going to park them on a visible airfield and wait for a Russian strike. They rotate between locations. They operate controlled sorties, moving in range when needed, and retreating to safe distance as the threat environment changes. The most likely operational pattern involves keeping one aircraft in reserve at all times, ready to be activated during major missile or drone attack sequences, while the second conducts planned sorties toward the eastern regions, getting within range of Russian airfields and bomber routes before withdrawing. It is a careful, disciplined use of a scarce resource. But even in that constrained operational posture, the results speak for themselves. And that brings us to Link 16. Link 16 is the tactical data network that ties together every NATO asset on a battlefield. Jets, ships, ground vehicles, air defense batteries, into a single shared picture. Think of it as a military internet where every node sees what every other node sees, in real time, with no latency, no interpretation errors, no garbled radio transmissions. AEW&C aircraft are the backbone of this network because they generate the data that everyone else acts on. In the ideal configuration, Ukraine's Saab 340s would serve as the data hub for the entire Ukrainian Air Force, feeding their radar picture directly into the cockpits of F-16s and Mirage 2000s, and into the fire control systems of Western air defense batteries. The system would function as one integrated, seamless kill network. There is a complication. Reports from 2024 suggested that Ukraine's F-16s had their Link 16 systems either removed or disabled before delivery. The concern was legitimate. If a Ukrainian F-16 were shot down or captured, Russia could potentially extract and analyze the Link 16 equipment. And that technology is among the most sensitive in NATO's inventory. The Americans made a cautious call, and Ukraine's jets flew without the full data link. But in March of 2025, reports emerged of modifications to Ukraine's F-16 fleet. The details remain classified. However, those modifications may have included some form of partial or full Link 16 restoration. If that is true, the Saab 340's value multiplies immediately. Instead of feeding data through secondary channels, voice communications, non-integrated data links, the radar picture from the 340 flows directly into every connected Ukrainian cockpit simultaneously. Russian jets are tagged and tracked before Ukrainian pilots even know they are in the vicinity. That is not an advantage. That is dominance. Even without full Link 16 connectivity, the 340 is already performing. But with it, Ukraine would have a kill chain architecture that most countries in the world cannot match. Zoom out for a moment, because what is happening here is not just about one aircraft type. The Saab 340 was always part of a larger equation. In October of 2025, Sweden committed to transferring up to 150 Saab JAS-39 Gripen E&F multi-role fighters to Ukraine. These are not legacy exports. The Gripen E&F is a current-generation supersonic fighter with advanced avionics, exceptional electronic warfare capabilities, superior agility, and the kind of operational flexibility that allows it to operate from dispersed airstrips and improvised airfields. A critical advantage in a war where Russian missiles routinely target Ukrainian airbases. Think about what the combination looks like. Saab 340 providing wide-area airborne surveillance. Gripen E&F fighters acting as the strike arm of a fully integrated kill network. Both platforms, designed by the same manufacturer, built around the same data architecture, optimized to work together. Ukraine would move from an air force that has spent 3 years improvising, flying Soviet-era jets alongside donated Western aircraft, stitching together incompatible systems with workarounds and determination, to an air force with a coherent, modern, integrated combat architecture. That is not a capability upgrade. That is a transformation. So why does this matter beyond Ukraine's borders? Because what Russia is watching in the skies over Ukraine is a demonstration of exactly what modern airborne surveillance does to the advantages it spent decades building. Russia's strategy in this war has depended on information asymmetry. It could see more than Ukraine. It could fly further than Ukraine. It could strike from ranges that Ukraine could not match. Strip away that information advantage, and the entire strategic picture shifts. Other actors are watching. China's military planners have studied Russia's glide bomb campaign closely. Iran has built its own area denial doctrine around the assumption that adversaries will lack persistent airborne surveillance. North Korea, which has been supplying Russia with artillery shells and now potentially other military goods, is developing its own long-range strike capabilities, built for a world in which the adversary is radar blind. The Saab 340 does not just change Ukraine's war. It demonstrates what becomes possible when a country that was technologically disadvantaged acquires a single, decisive surveillance capability. The economics of Russia's glide bomb campaign only make sense if the bombs reach their targets with acceptable loss rates to the platforms that carry them. If the Saab 340 degrades that, if Russian pilots start flying less aggressively, launching from worse positions at longer ranges, reducing the accuracy of their bombs to preserve their jets, then the entire cost calculus of the campaign changes. Every bomb that misses is a bomb that costs Russia money without taking anything from Ukraine. Repeat that at scale, over months and years, and you understand why a single unarmed aircraft can matter more than an entire wing of fighters. Russia built its air campaign for a version of Ukraine that could not see the sky. That Ukraine no longer exists. There is something worth saying about the way Sweden has approached this war. Stockholm is not a member of NATO. It joined the alliance in 2024, after decades as a military non-aligned state, and it has nevertheless become one of Ukraine's most significant military partners. The decision to transfer AEW&C aircraft is not a small one. These are sovereign strategic assets, maintained for Sweden's own defense, capable of providing the kind of surveillance that underpins a country's entire air picture. Sweden did not have to do this, and by choosing to, it bypassed the hesitation that has defined some larger Western partners' decisions about high-value transfers. Germany deliberated for months before sending tanks. The United States required extensive lobbying before agreeing to F-16s. Sweden identified what Ukraine needed, calculated that the benefit outweighed the cost, and moved. Strategic independence, in this context, does not mean acting alone. It means having the institutional clarity to make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by alliance dynamics or escalation anxiety. Sweden's contribution to Ukraine's kill chain is not just about 2 aircraft. It is about demonstrating a model of assistance that delivers decisive capability rather than capabilities calibrated to avoid friction. The result is flying over Ukraine right now, 20,000 feet up, scanning the horizon in every direction, watching every jet, every drone, every glide bomb release point. Russia launched this war with a doctrine built on information superiority, kinetic mass, and an adversary it expected to fold in days. Ukraine did not fold. It adapted, improvised, and absorbed. But adaptation has limits when the fundamental asymmetry, the ability to see and be seen, remains unchanged. The Saab 340 changes that asymmetry. Not completely, not overnight, but structurally. Every sortie that aircraft flies costs Russia something. It costs pilots their confidence, it costs planners their assumptions, it costs the glide bomb campaign its most important ingredient, impunity. 150 Gripen fighters are on their way. Link 16 may already be flowing. The kill chain that took down that Su-35 in June 2025 is not a one-time event. It is a template. Russia built its trap for a version of Ukraine that could not see the sky. Ukraine can see the sky now. If you found value in this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.